Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today, we'll be reviewing Star Wars The Courtship of Princess Leia. You might be wondering, why are you reviewing a 20-plus-year-old book? And the reason why is because I've been reading the Star Wars books. I started with the Thrawn trilogy, went back, read Return of the Jedi, then the True Set Back era, and then Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mindor, and now I'm on The Courtship of Princess Leia, which I finished, which means I will now be on The Tatooine Ghost. And I'm going to start doing video reviews on them. I'll probably do on some Star Wars games, maybe some Halo games, any Star Wars books I read in the future. Unfortunately, the ones I've already read, I probably won't do reviews on because I'd have to go back, read them, and then make the review. Maybe if I'm ever waiting for a book to come in the mail, I'll try and read them in that time frame and then make the review on it. So that's what I'll do with that. And that's why I'm reviewing this 20-plus-year-old book. Be warned, there will be spoilers, but considering this isn't even one of the... It's a good book, don't get me wrong, but it's not on the level of the Thrawn trilogy or some of the other books. I have a feeling if you haven't read it, you probably weren't planning on it. But still, there will be spoilers, so be warned. Anyway, this book is about how Han and Leia got married, and Han comes back from a 5-month-long military trip, and he sees Leia got proposed to by Isildur, and the rest of the story is Han trying to win back Leia, because for some reason Leia is siding with Isildur. And it's explained in the book why she is. Isildur offers planets that the Alderaanian refugees all the way back from A New Hope could live at, and that really entices her, and the Alderaanian diplomats are really pushing her to accept the marriage proposal. Han ends up kidnapping Leia, and everyone ends up at a planet called Dathomir, which Han won in a gambling match earlier on in the story, and they end up fighting some Night Sisters there alongside the Singing Mountain clan. So that's the story of the book. They end up winning, obviously, and they kill the leader of the Night Sisters, Geth Zyron. And that name is really hard to pronounce. I wish they would put some more work into naming these characters, because that name is cool. Maybe spell it a slight bit differently, but that's minor. Some people probably don't have a problem with the weird names. I do. Han's okay. Mon Mothma's okay. Obi-Wan's okay, but some of these names in these books, these early Star Wars books, are really weird, really out there. Anyway, so some things I really liked about the book would have to be definitely Luke. I really liked Luke. There was a lot of Luke being all mystical and kind of sounding like Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon in The Phantom Menace, Obi-Wan in A New Hope, and just that really Jedi talk where he's explaining how Jedis work and explaining the Force to people who have the power but have never used it. I think that's like my favorite thing about Luke, is when he's talking about the Force and he's explaining like how it works, or don't give in to your hate, all that kind of stuff. That's like my favorite Luke. Luke is my favorite character, and this book has a bunch of Luke because a lot of the Dathomirians, almost all the women, are Force sensitive, so there's a lot of Luke talking about that kind of stuff with them. And another one of the characters I like was Tenel, who is a member of the Singing Mountain clan, which is comprised of a bunch of light side Dathomirian witches. However, they don't understand the Force in that aspect, so they just don't perform night spells, which are spells that, such as Force lightning, are generally associated with the Sith. So they don't practice those spells, and she's really cool. She doesn't understand any of the culture outside of her own planet, and watching her interact with some of the other characters, learning about it, is really interesting. Her and Isildur, really interesting chemistry there. Her and Luke, I really like that. The way Dathomir society is ran, and the way the Happen society is ran, which is the place where Isildur's from. He's from the Haps continuum. Both of those planets have a matriarchal society However, on Dathomir, the women own the men as slaves, where on Hapan, the women are just in charge. So watching them communicate, I started saying that he's a ruler, but then Tanel is like, but are you really? You're marrying someone to be queen. You're not marrying someone to rule by your side. And watching that interaction is really interesting. Gethzeran is the leader of the Night Sisters, and she's really neat. She's she almost reminds me of a woman version of Palpatine, just the way that they talk about her, the way she's depicted. She's supposed to be a woman with a really wrinkly, distorted face, kind of like Palpatine, and she wears a black robe that hides her face, kind of like Palpatine. I feel like they took a lot of inspiration from Palpatine, but she seems really cool, so she's getting a pass on being kind of copyish. But she's really powerful, and there's a fight with her and Luke. She just waves her hand and casts a spell. When these Night Sisters and the Singing Mountain Clan witches, when they cast spells or use the Force, they say words when they do it, and they think that they need to say the words, but that's not the case. And she pops all the blood vessels in Luke's head. And before the fight, Luke was talking about how he was nervous because he's never fought someone that wanted to kill him. In episode 5, Vader wanted to turn him. In episode 6, both Vader and Palpatine had their own reasons for wanting him alive. And none of the books up until this point have really had any strong Force users that fought him one-on-one. So he was nervous about fighting Gethzeran, but she totally destroys him. She almost kills him. And then after that, there's a scene where he kind of goes, his vision kind of goes dark, and he's dying, and he has a vision of all the creatures around him, the plants, the grass, the salamanders on the rocks, and the fish in the pond. He sees them all, like stuff like radiating off of them and coming towards him, and he realizes he's seeing the Force breathe life into him, and he gets back up. And there's an earlier thing about where Tanel said that the Jedi can't die, nature favors them, something like that. And I think that's really cool. You could see he's going to be really powerful in this book, and maybe he didn't win in his fight this time, but you could see he has potential, which definitely gets expanded on in some of the later books. The Thrawn trilogy, which I've already read, which is like a year later, you can see he's just a little bit more powerful. He can take on strong Force users without worrying. So I like that. You see Luke's progression. And there's a scene at the end where so Han explains earlier that he needs 2 pilots to fly the Falcon and to get it out of hyperspace. And Luke manages to fire all the guns, the swivel ones on the top and bottom, and the front ones. He's able to fire all the guns and pilot all by himself, while, like, they say he's like sweating, and he's like, you can see the blood vessels on his temple like swelling, and he's clearly like focusing really hard on controlling all these different aspects of the Falcon, and he's like laser pinpointing these witches down in the prison where Han was captured, which is a story, a plot in the story. Han gets captured, he gives himself over, and Luke flies in with the Falcon like that to rescue him. And that's a really cool scene. Luke is super powerful. Han is cool. He has his typical Han catchphrases and sarcasticness. Same with 3PO. He's really innocent but annoying at the same time. Han has a problem, though, that I will get to in a little bit. But that part of Han, like the snarky, sarcastic Han, is there, and it's really good. Dathomir is cool. The idea of the Happens is cool. I found them boring in the book, but they might get expanded upon in later books. I might end up liking them, but in this book they were kind of boring. Dathomir is really cool, though, the way they describe the planet. It's almost described as like a creepy looking Endor, but they never say that in the book, but that's kind of how I pictured it, like an Endor with like skinny trees and like twisted trees, and it's really like kind of like a purple tone to everything, and it's not like anything from the Clone Wars animated. the CGI animated one, it's nothing like that. That Dathomir and this Dathomir are nothing alike. So I like this one better. They broke into a prison to look for spare parts for the Falcon because the Falcon got damaged on its way down to Dathomir because he crashed it into a falling ship into the hangar of that ship and let the ship fall, and then he turned back on the engines and flew out of the ship before it landed, but crashing in there damaged a lot of the Falcon. So they had to sneak into the prison to get spare parts for that, and I thought that prison break-in was really cool. The mountain battle at the end, which was kind of the final battle, was really cool. There was a short battle that they were kind of taking part in after that, the part where Luke flies over the prison and he's piloting the Falcon all by himself. That was cool. I liked the mountain battle. That was a cool battle. That's where Luke ends up fighting Gethzeran, and she almost kills him. Okay, so earlier in the book, Yoda is on a video recording saying that they were repulsed by the witches, and it was like on a holo recording because Luke was on another planet searching for Jedi records because he really doesn't know how to start up the Jedi Order because he's the only one left at this point. And Yoda and Obi-Wan's ability to talk to him is fading, so he's trying to figure out how to start this, and he's going looking for records, and he finds one record that was barely usable, and there's just bits and pieces of it, and there's a part where Yoda says, "We were repulsed by the witches," and the way it describes Yoda is pretty cool. It was like a middle-aged Yoda, and he seems all energetic, so that was cool. I like the way the witches are described. Like when they use the dark side, they run the risk of popping blood vessels in their face. There's a lot of popping blood vessels in this book, just because of the strain it takes to use these powers. And their faces are described as purple and with purple blotches on them and heavy wrinkles and scarring from that. The attention to characters and the way they act, except for Leia, which I'll get to, but Luke and R2 and C-3PO, Chewbacca, Han, I really like the way those characters, that you could see them in the movies acting like this. Only Han halfway and not Leia at all. But you could see Luke, like, this could be played by Mark Hamill. It's so much like Luke. And C-3PO, you know, is so much like his movie counterpart. It's really good. And then just Luke continuously looking for any remnant of the old Jedi Order during the book is cool. I like Luke being all Jedi and stuff. Some things I didn't like. There were a few things I liked more than I didn't like, but what I didn't like was Leia in half of Han. Leia, what they did to Leia in this book is on par with what they did to Luke in The Last Jedi. They made Leia cheat on Han and kiss Isolde in front of Han. Han was basically a cuck in this book. His girlfriend, lover, like it's known that they love each other. It's been expressed in the previous books. Is kissing another man in front of him because she's confused. Leia was a bitch in this book, and Han was a cuck. Han was cool, but he was a cuck. And for some reason, Han seemed to care a little bit, like he did care. There were parts where he was drowning his sorrows in the cantina. But, like, when the dude was kissing Leia in front of him, he didn't do anything, besides only a couple times where after she leaves, he says something like, "I'm gonna fight her," you know. That part about Han I didn't like, the way he just took it. And Leia, I hated Leia in this book. Once they realized they were stranded on Dathomir, and things were pretty serious, and the whole love thing, they kind of all had to push it behind them to get off the planet and survive. I liked Leia a little more, but I still was like, man, you bitch, why are you still like thinking about Isolde? Why are you still like, you'll kiss him when nobody's around? And then Han never said like fuck you, Leia. Like, I wouldn't take that. If my girl was kissing another man in front of me after I'd been away for a long time, I would, no, that's, I don't know why Han took that, and I don't like what they did with Leia. It didn't ruin Leia, because I know in the later books she's good, and unlike Luke in the Last Jedi, She didn't die, so she still has time to improve from what she did in this book. But yeah, she was terrible in this book. And Isildur, it's partly why I didn't like him. He was such a dick to Han, and even though in the end him and Tinel ended up together, there was a lot of romance in this book. Even though they ended up together in the end, I still really didn't like him. I was kind of hoping he died. And one Singing Mountain Clan witch had predicted he would die. And I got really excited. And I was let down when he didn't. Warlord Singe was the leader of the Imperials in this book. And his right-hand man was General Melvar. And he was a comic book mustache-twirling villain. He had metal fingernails that were sharp. There was a part where he dug his fingernails into Han's shoulder just to hurt him, and I think he had a scar down his face. And I think Melvar did. I could be wrong, but the fingernails alone in his desire just to hurt people was so weird. Like, am I watching a cartoon? Like, this is so unrealistic, and I didn't like him. He was just too cartoony. The Alderaanians, I didn't like them. They all just seemed stuffy and uptight, and there was no real redeeming qualities about them. Like, I didn't like them because they were wanting Leia to marry Isildur, who I already didn't like. But there was no redeeming factor to them, and they kind of disappear like a third way through the book. So I didn't like them. They never redeemed themselves. And I have two more major things. I didn't like, well, okay. I didn't like the Happens because I also didn't like the Happens because they were kind of boring, and I imagine they could improve probably in later books because I'm sure they'll reappear. But in this book, they were just kind of boring. Like, there was good world building with the Happens and Dathomir, but the Dathomir succeeded, and the Happens didn't because the Happens were boring. So hopefully they improve. And I didn't like Isildur because he was just kind of a jerk. I kind of pictured him like as the guy from Talladega Nights with the accent and just the way he presented himself. He redeemed himself by the end of the book. He ended up staying away from Leia. Not staying away, they're like friends or something, but he ended up getting with Tinel, who was the Singing Mountain Clan witch. They ended up together. But I still just didn't like him because of how douchey he was towards Han and just his general attitude. He gets kind of humbled while on Dathomir, but I still just don't like him. Maybe he'll improve in later books if he reappears. So there are two major things I didn't like about the book. And the first thing is a majority of the plot in this book is driven by incompetence. What I mean by that is there's a lot of instances where somebody will get captured, and the line before the line talking about how they get captured will say, Luke being preoccupied with his, or Han and Leia and Chewie ran up the hill, too preoccupied or too focused to look at their surroundings, and they get ambushed. It's just lazy. They just were not paying attention. Whereas in the Thrawn trilogy, Thrawn was a genius, and New Republic was really smart. So there were no idiots in the book, and nothing ever happened out of stupidity. Somebody just got outsmarted. unlike this book where people just get captured for being idiots and not paying attention. I found that really lazy. And it seemed like a lot of that was just to set up my next big problem with the book. It seemed like some of it was just to set up Dave Wolverton's weird obsession with dominant women in this book. Dave Wolverton's the author, and you know, it's cool if you're into dominant women. You know, that's your thing. That's cool. But this man wrote a Star Wars book that entirely had to do with that idea. Both the new societies that were introduced were matriarchal. One where the men were slaves, and they weren't just like work slaves. They were sex slaves. The women would breed with them by force. And it's kind of explained because only the women were taught how to use the force, so the men couldn't revolt. Like, if there was no force, you'd say, why doesn't the man just not do that? But no, the women have the force, and like what Gethzerin did to Luke, it's pretty powerful. So, you know, it makes sense, but at the same time, it's like, why make two societies like that? One where men are sex slaves, and then have a bunch of scenes where there is the whole idea of Han being a cuck to Leia, where it's not explicitly said that's the case, but it's really like, if you know what the definition of that word means and you read the book, you say, oh yeah, Han's lady's kissing another man in front of him, Han's a cuck. That, along with there being two matriarchal societies that are oppressive to men, like actually oppressive, like one of them has men as sex slaves, like, it's not, I'm not being exaggerating, that's in the book. And then scenes where, like, Tanel, when she met Luke, and there's a lot of the prequel type stuff where lightsabers will be dropped, like Tanel hits Luke's hands with a club, and then when they meet, because she tries to capture him, and she knocks his lightsaber out of his hand, and there's a lot of that in the prequels where they just drop their lightsabers, which I always found irritating because you never see that in any of the movies or games. And understandably, games, that'd be a weird gameplay thing, but you don't see it in the cutscenes. So that's just this really small gripe. But when Tanel knocks the lightsaber out of Luke's hands, she does this like force storm thing where she throws a bunch of rocks and trees at him, and he falls down. And then she gets on top of him, and his arms are to his side, and her legs are over his arms, and she's sitting on top of him. And then there's a line about how the strength of her legs, Luke was too weak to move. And it's like, why? Why you gotta phrase it like that? It's like, I'm pretty sure it said like her bare legs, blah blah blah. Why do they gotta do it like that? I feel weird talking about it to you guys. I don't know. I just wish there was a lot less of that, because I'm reading a Star Wars book, not a 50 Shades book, alright? Those two, the incompetence driving the plot and the weird dominant woman fetish, are the main things I didn't like. Anyway, I think this is a good read. Besides some of the things I didn't like about it, it still is good. It still has the Luke and Dathomir, and some of the some of the battles are pretty good. The villain is really cool. That stuff is worth reading. All the other stuff, it doesn't break the book. The strong stuff is really strong. The bad stuff is just bad. That's pretty much all my opinion on the book. I'm going to be doing some more videos soon. The next review might be on Corfelian Interlude, which is a short story that is included in the paperback of Tatooine Ghost, which is about Han and Leia's honeymoon. So I might do that next, or I might include that with Tatooine Ghost. I don't know. Probably be some video game related videos coming up soon. So yeah, if you liked this, please subscribe. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.